Welcome back, everyone, to our next talk. Here we have a talk with Timothy Halloran on the 12th house Neptune archetype, navigating sacrifice, and the difference between spiritual versus pathological sacrifice. Very interesting talk. I'm very excited for Timothy to be joining us. This is his first time speaking at this conference. He is an old, dear EA colleague and brother, and a great contribution to this community. So let's welcome Timothy for today's talk. And as always, if you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand or put it in the comment, and I'll be following that.
All right. Thank you so much, Ari Moshe. And it is such a pleasure to be here, feeling very fortunate, all things considered, to be talking about the nature of the 12th house. And of course, we'll also be discussing the archetypal similarity to the sign of Pisces and its ruler, Neptune. So, feeling very grateful to Neptune today that I was able to make it show up and share this presentation with you all. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen. First, we'll take a look at the archetype of the 12th house before we start to look at some chart examples together. All right. So I like to begin by going over our objectives. And we're here to understand the archetypal reality of the 12th house, its essential truth, its unique expression. We're going to explore the cross-cultural expression of the 12th house, how it has been treated by different cultures and societies over different periods of time. In evolutionary astrology, of course, this is very relevant. We'll take a look at the particular technique. So, to understand souls who have a particular highlighted 12th house signature, as well as how to approach such souls in a counseling or a supportive setting. And of course, that also applies in how we are relating to the 12th house in ourself. Okay. So the final zodiac sign is reflected in the final house. And what Pisces reflects is a cyclic existence of reality. So what we're talking about is the final phase of life itself. This final phase, which has to do with the total comprehension of what life is, purpose, meaning, is said to be the most difficult sign to comprehend. And very interestingly, as we'll discuss, Jeffrey Green mentioned that the Pisces archetype contains all other archetypes within it. Now, every house sign archetype has unique function. Each has its own geometry, focus, and direction. So we want to understand the specific geometry and direction as it pertains to Pisces, the 12th house. Now, the gravity of the 12th house is towards an undoing, whether it be an unconscious gravity, like being led unbeknownst, like the fool off the edge of a cliff, or more so consciously embraced, like relinquishing control of one's own creative direction. So to become inspired by higher forces or the needs, requests of the greater surrounding world. Now, we know the Pisces is a water element. This reflects in the 12th house. And water is always moving, never stops or ends. So let me begin by, first of all, expressing the glyph of Pisces itself. And this glyph, I think, is a wonderful encapsulation of much of the symbol and meaning of Pisces, because the glyph of Pisces itself is this image of the all in all coming together, as well as the all and all expanding itself out throughout the totality of the creation before returning to itself. And here I'm laughing at the fact that I don't have a Pisces symbol on the PowerPoint so that we know what it looks like. The Pisces symbol is actually a Taurian field. So this is the divine Om. This is the trumpeting of angels, the sound of the cosmic collective ocean, the divine moment, the divine word that simply begins at the source of all and then extends through this divine and everything merges back into the divine. And so oftentimes it is by a waterfall or by putting a seashell up to our ear, meditating upon the waves of the ocean, that we are brought most into contact with that mysterious, all pervasive everything, which is Pisces. And as we'll talk about, Pisces in its nature is therefore incomprehensible, inconceivable. It is not possible to understand through the mind. And so we hear many attempts. And in many respects, that's all this presentation will be, is an attempt to illustrate the unillustratable. Of course, this challenge is most familiar to the artist, how to capture perfection, how to capture an ideal. It is not something that can become totally grasped. Okay. But the 12th house is ultimately about returning to that. This house is again about undoing, about surrendering. So to return towards that which we originated. Now, we understand in evolutionary astrology that this is the entire purpose of spiritual evolution. And the entire phase of spiritual evolution is therefore correlated and ruled by the planet Neptune. As we continue to spiritually evolve, we will confront confusion, misunderstanding, projections about God, about love, as we continue to surrender and let go of more projections, more expectations, more assumptions. This is the reality of the 12th house. Of course, this does not have to necessarily be embraced. Of course, this does not necessarily have to be easy. And whether we be counseling ourselves or another person, we would never want to minimize another person's struggle or another person's disillusionment by simply saying, this is meant, this is good for you. Because the experience of disillusionment, the experience of loss, having what we've loved or identified with, attached to, dissolved, is the most painful suffering that we experience. And it is also the challenge that we came here to confront. So this is, again, the nature of the 12th house. It's an eternal movement towards that which we have originated, where all of creation is simultaneously born and unfolds out from. So we're going to deal with simultaneous both and when it comes to the inconceivable, incomprehensible reality of Pisces in the 12th house. Again, it's easy to assign presumptive notions. Pisces is God. Pisces is love. But we can also simultaneously see that there is a difference between us and God, us and all that is. This is the reality of Pisces as well. Now, because the 12th house soul is in a temporary phenomenon in this world, they are learning to let all things pass. Because Pisces is ultimately where we all inevitably end, it would be wise for us to learn how to relate to this fundamental phase of life. The gravity or experience of the 12th is outside of our control. One thing leads to next in an eternal crescendo, like an Escher sketch or an eternal stairwell or a butterfly effect. I forget the name of the actual auditory illusion where you can have the experience of eternally going up a scale or eternally going down a scale in a similar optical illusion to an Escher drawing. I think those are some of the best expressions of what Pisces or the 12th house is like, because it is never finished. It is never completed. And therefore, there's this ongoing, lingering, like the scent of something that was once in the room and has just left, but has left a lingering. So too is the relationship between the individual and God. And that yearning for God via the lingering as well as the mystery is what drives us into transcendence. Transcendence is the soul's desire to let go of interference. Transcendence is the opportunity for us to actualize what real spiritual sacrifice is, as opposed to the pathological expectations and obligations that can come from society, religion, etc., that may not necessarily be an authentic or a natural sacrifice. In this lecture, we'll explore the discrepancy between these two. In its highest expression, Pisces 12th house can manifest like musical composition, with every detail of the song mystically interconnecting through the musician's sudden strike of pure inspiration, rather than any drawn out forethought. Similarly, in its most negative manifestation, an inexplicable series of unfortunate events can have much the same feel as getting flushed down the toilet. This is the interesting thing about the archetypal reality that Jeffrey Green is so potently described through the system of evolutionary astrology. This is where there tends to be so much misunderstanding, bias, or projections, especially for folks newly entering into astrology, as there's these stereotypes about particular signs, right? And so we can easily say, oh, Pisces, very, big-hearted, loving, spiritual sign, and Sagittarius, big-hearted, spiritual, and these can be, of course, have massive blind spots. What we have to understand is that each zodiac sign is correlated with an archetypal reality that's going to be so expressive. We have to bear in mind that the entire zodiac accounts for all life experience. So the same archetype that allows for one to become possessed by divine inspiration is the same possession that could lead one into a downward spiral, like getting flushed down a toilet. And this is why the orientation that we form to the whole, the particular beliefs that we hold, what we trust and have faith in, is of utmost importance. And why the experience of disillusionment when one of those things does get flushed down the toilet is it's such an important experience on our spiritual journey to understand why. This is evolutionary astrology, to understand why. And it's normally not as simple as a karmic pendulum, or you did something wrong in a past lifetime, or you did the right prayer or the wrong prayer. It gets much more meaningful, much more rich, much more tasty and rewarding as we continue through the spiritual evolutionary journey. Okay. So in Pisces, what we learn is similarly to musical orchestration, attempting to grab onto or change, control an outcome tends to produce no favorable results. And this is something we're all learning these years, are we not? While transiting Saturn is going through Pisces, because Saturn wants to build and really wants things to be pragmatic and have control over everything. And then it enters the sign of Pisces, where this is fundamentally impossible. We live in a life where we could hit the nail on the head, do every single thing perfectly, spiritually ascend to dimensions we never knew existed before an asteroid smacks the Earth and everything hits the reset button. That's the final reality of Pisces. We do not have control as much as we may wish we had control via our convenient beliefs. It is oftentimes, again, the disillusioning experience or even the tragic experience, though challenging, can open our hearts to a deeper reality and a deeper truth. This deeper reality and deeper truth may have something to do with the awakening of our hearts to compassion. So the series of what can be unfortunate events can be beyond the individual's control, leading to a same end, an alignment that surrenders to the greater forces of life. Now we can take a look, a brief look, because we only have a bit of time today. Human sacrifice in culture and tradition has been embedded in almost all ancient cultures. This is a mystery in and of itself. Why has almost every ancient culture very much reverently and understood not just sacrifice, but oftentimes human sacrifice? It was recognized as an essential spiritual act. Now, while spiritual sacrifice at essence is a most mysterious and incomprehensible phenomenon, the idea behind it is it always works to provide some type of return or resurrection, despite its outcome not being known, because there always must be a surrendering, there always must be a letting. So, for example, it's believed in Celtic tradition that the most charismatic, intelligent young man, who is oftentimes the magister, sometimes referred to as the devil, was chosen to be a human sacrifice and was sacrificed upon a great oak tree for the continued providence of that clan. And it was believed that their consciousness spread out throughout the entire collective, the entire clan, their crops, and everything that they're trying to bring in. So the speculation is the ancient Celts actually would sacrifice their most charming, intelligent, youthful soul, oftentimes the lead male, as the sacrifice. And again, this has also been common throughout many, many ancient cultures. And it's not an easy thing for us to understand. Suicide is not an easy thing to understand. There's been very different cultural approaches to suicide, generally discouraged in certain cases. It is seen as acceptable. In certain ancient cultures, such as Mayan or Hawaiian, it may be out of the deep pain of romantic love, like someone's romantic love, dies. Someone may commit suicide. That in ancient times may be considered acceptable. Or in battle was very common for many cultures as an act of preservation to take one's life. Seppuku, ritual suicide in Japanese. In Islam, shahada, those who die fighting for their faith. These types of sacrifice are called upon by circumstance outside the individual's control and requires the total surrender to that circumstance and what it calls upon for the good of all. Now, a point here is, could this carry distortion? Because we're going to look at the day and age in which we live, as well as some of the conditioned expectations and obligations, which could make sense as to where there can be confusion around what is an authentic sacrifice versus conditioned expectation, obligation, like you should be killing yourself for your nation, your race, etc. Spiritual sacrifice is never chosen by fear. It is never forced, acted upon out of a desire to escape. It requires fearlessness and a great courage to surrender to whatever is asked at its very essence. At its very essence, soul level integrity makes the sacrifice authentic, or an expression of pure love or commitment to the greater good. And as Jesus said, this is from Matthew 16:24, if anyone should come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. This is brought up again and again throughout the Bible, the symbolism of taking up one's cross. Let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Luke 9:23, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Now, 12th house disillusionment in regards to our relationship to the whole. We have no control. Whatever free will we have, whatever percent that is, will operate within its given time frame as a speck upon the earth. Although possible for that specks to generate a butterfly effect of incredible change, an incoming meteor could also take the entire planet out at any given moment. Asteroid impacts make themselves present throughout our lives, challenging us to our core as to our purpose, when the reality is all can be lost at any time, and ultimately all will be lost to the inevitable churning of time. The goals, dreams, and ideals we orient our lives to also changes as our souls deepen into increasingly purposeful, driven life. The be-all, end-all truth is not clearly perceived from our given human vantage point, so we must continuously adjust as we evolve all the way through, and especially through the stage of spiritual evolution. We can easily say, and this is going to be maybe a controversial, but I want to say it anyways, statement. We could easily say that all souls in spiritual evolution are confused, because it's not really until the very end of spiritual evolution that we really understand what real spirituality is. So we can look at souls in very advanced stages of evolution who can simultaneously be confused. This is a reality I don't see quite enough people talking about, but it is matter of fact. And we understand this very clearly in Jeffrey Green's breakdown of spiritual evolution. Now, disillusionment commonly occurs in particular areas. This is Neptune area. Relationship to God, relationship to the soulmate, the guru. Generally, wherever there's something that can be too good to be true, or an ultimate ideal. That's what Neptune is. So this is, again, wherever we have that ultimate ideal, that dream, that fantasy, that's going to be Neptune, and wherever we project the Neptune experience. Now, this can lead to shattered dreams, the potential experience for disillusionment with a cult or a guru, which is not necessarily merely the group dynamic and pressure, which is rather an Aquarius 11th house dynamic. Rather, the guru or cult is also an embodied representative of an ideal or a dream through a 12th house merging with that supposed ideal, and therefore a potential losing of our sense of reality, having become absorbed into a delusion. In such settings, the very antidote to treat the potential for losing sight and falling into a trap is oftentimes the very thing forbidden by the cult or the spiritual teaching. What's most common teaching in a cult? Don't think. And certainly don't think for yourself, and certainly don't think critically. And guess what's going to be a part of the cosmic antidote to the 12th house dilemma? It is going to be the opposite sign and house, which is Virgo, critical thought. Trapped in a vortex of its own idealistically reinforced self-limitation, the individual will suffer from the disillusionment of being unable to resolve the conflict between the beliefs it holds onto and is projecting either outside of itself or onto itself, and the objective feedback it is receiving. So Virgo, what we're seeing very large on the screen, that's what we need. Objective feedback, critical feedback. Is this real? Begs the question, what is off? Is this all right? Is this totally true? Or are there missing parts of the picture? Common cult thing, don't look at that thing. Don't look in that direction. Oh, don't pay attention to that. Those are red flags. Ultimately, the soul can save itself from meltdown only by pulling away from that which it has merged with or become infatuated over by creating healthy boundaries to evaluate. Okay, so this is our cosmic antidote for the 12th house dilemma. It is largely simply the polarity of the 6th house and Virgo. But this is going to come up again, and again. So even though this is a very simple technique, we're going to see how underlaying this is just like a fundamental evolutionary lesson for all people on planet Earth right now. Because as I'm mentioning, we're at the tail end of an age of Pisces. It would be fair to say that we're at a collective crisis of belief. We don't know what's real at this particular moment of time. That would be the crises at the tail end of a Pisces age. The other part of this cosmic antidote is reflected in the planetary south nodes of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter in Capricorn. This is just such an overwhelming dynamic that has collectively affected all souls on the planet at this time. We need to apply it to nearly every experience that we have in our life. There's been such an enormous disbalance towards Capricorn, which is achievement, it is success. It's leaving an inheritance to your children. It's proving your capabilities, oftentimes in a very outward way. Well, the issue is when that becomes mixed with a Pisces age. Because now you have militant approach to spirituality. Now you have militant approach to sacrifice, surrender, and even compassion that can manifest as a pathological confusion where the person is sacrificing themselves because they are supposed to via their parents, their bosses, what they were taught by the society in which they were born, which could very easily lead us into continuously living in a prison society. That is the reflection of the south node of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter in Capricorn. That says that we do live in a prison society. We best make sure that our beliefs are not encouraging us to be apathetic, sacrificing ourselves to, or throwing ourselves under the bus of something we don't, it's not actually maybe what we think it is. We have to discern the reality. We have to therefore come into an authentic spiritual connection. This is what spiritual evolution leads us into. We eventually find a spiritual connection through direct connection that doesn't merely have to believe what other people are believing or just simply reading books, but the proof is in the pudding because God is nature. This isn't about belief system. This is about forming a healthy relationship to the whole. That's what this Virgo 6th house polarity is. Measure your beliefs. Is it useful? Is it effective? Is it improving, Virgo, your relationship to the whole, Pisces? Because we can create beliefs which can be crippling, that can get in the way of our effective relating to others or the world in which we're born or the whole. In which case, I would encourage us to evaluate that belief system. Is it true? Is it working? Is it effective? Is it really serving us? Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross. I'm coming to a repeated bit here. Let me skip ahead. Let's continue about pathological sacrifice. To surrender, the surrender of the soul appearing outwardly similarly, the act of suicide is in essence the inverse of spiritual sacrifice. At its root, suicidal ideation is a reflection of a crisis of faith. disillusionment as to what is the very purpose of its existence, and not comprehending the circumstance it is struggling with. A soul can be confused into believing that taking their own life would resolve whatever crises or circumstantial dilemma they find themselves in. Jeffrey Green explains this phenomenon once again in the Neptunian way, that there can be exceptions, that generally suicide does not lead to an authentic escape from life, because life is a setup of circumstances for us to learn, grow, and evolve through. So suicide doesn't allow us to escape those lessons. We'll actually come back to them. But Jeffrey Green also gives exceptions for people, whether in degenerative diseases or other circumstances. So the point is that this is not a circumstantial reality. This is complex and really outside of our human comprehension. Now, what's very common in Pisces is a soul can become confused over merging with another, or a dream or a goal, where the soul loses, or rather gives up, its discerning faculty. To accept the so-called dream they are living is actually a nightmare and separate from it. That's why we stay in delusions oftentimes. That's why we resist Virgo, because we want it to be a dream. We don't want to wake up to the nightmare, or want to start from scratch with a beginner's mind. So we oftentimes cling to a dying belief system. This, again, is the specific phasal reality of Pisces, being the last part of any cycle. This is where cycles come to die. So we don't want to go down with the sinking ship. Cycles die to rebirth themselves in new and different ways. If the soul cannot accept the reality it is in, it commits itself to sinking, to the notion of all being lost. In so doing, it sinks itself deeper into the very dilemma it has attempted to avoid by committing to that dilemma, being that which got the best of them, and identifying with their losses. So, how could this sinking change? We simply have to embrace surrender. This is not an easy thing to say. This is not an easy thing to do. When somebody has gone days without food or water or power from a recent hurricane, we don't want to just say, hey, surrender, let go of everything. There's going to be something new coming in. In Pisces, we experience the reality of hidden blessings. In Pisces, we experience the reality of these types of sacrifices, even the ones that seem outside of our hands, can lead to hidden blessings, almost in a divine humor type of way. But surrendering is something we must learn. It's a process. It's never finished. Nobody is a perfect surrenderer. Nobody is perfectly detached from everybody, at least nobody that I've met, because nobody I've met is so far walking on water. So you have planets transit the 12th house. We're going to have some of this perhaps be our experience. This can be, there's more to the archetype of the 12th, but it's possible that we go through the experience of disillusionment, or something is dissolved. The moon's north node, for example, transits your 12th house. There will be roughly a year where the soul is learning to surrender. And there may be things that are outside our control that aren't going the way that we've planned, and that may be for better or for worse. And sometimes what we think it is the opposite of what it ends up becoming. So it is with the double-edged sword of truth. Now, the challenge for the 12th house native, which, by the way, we're going to get to the formula before we get to chart examples. When I refer to a Pisces 12th house soul, this may be somebody with their south node in the 12th house, or Pisces, Pluto in the 12th house, south node in the 12th house, Pisces planetary ruler in the 12th house. We'll get to this formula and understand how it affects people differently. Someone who has a huge stellium of planets in the 12th house similarly will have so much of their consciousness in 12th house reality. So they may appear to be drifting out of this world. And the challenge of a mystical existence is living in a pragmatic world. Let's see if I can get the right slide. Here we go. The 12th house realm exists in the ethers. So the soul who lives in the 12th will always appear to have their head in the clouds. Generalization here, where they are lost in thought, or they're lost in music they are composing. It is perhaps for this very same reason of existing in an invisible realm that in relation to others around them, they themselves may become altogether forgotten or invisible. For their apparent aloofness to a practical world, they are taken less seriously, their dreaminess reduced to a lack of mental fortitude, or their orientation to charity and others' well-being seen as something airy-fairy as opposed to competition. They are first to be voted off the island or volunteered for the labor, made to be scapegoat or sacrifice, as to be harnessed, harvested, used, while often being the glue holding everything together. That glue is simultaneously invisible. Now that kind of sounds like God, her himself. Indeed, the 12th house is where the soul has an opportunity to step into the shoes of God, so to speak. This is why this is the house of the mystic. Truly, the soul that lives in the 12th house knows that unique experience. So, what is it like from inside the ethers? And how to handle inconceivable sensitivities, hidden, subtle senses. Say you have Venus in the 12th house, for example. This could be an indication not only of being a compassionate person with a bleeding heart, could also be an indication for having developed spiritual senses, which would be much the same like having physical senses, although in the ethereal realm. This is Neptune, by the way, in any person's chart, as well as the 12th house in any person's chart. You may have no planets in Pisces. You may have no planets in the 12th house, but you will have a particular zodiac sign as the 12th cusp. And there will be a particular planet that therefore rules that 12th house. This will reflect your unique 12th house experience. This is similarly true to the planet Neptune and planetary aspects to Neptune, as they can reveal inconceivable sensitivities. Why are these sensitivities inconceivable? Well, I gave the example of the spiritual senses that exist on the causal plane. These senses are inconceivable because there is a direct merging function that happens through Pisces, the 12th house, or Neptune. Do we understand how or why we suddenly are the thing we are merging with and can therefore draw insight and information about that which we've merged with? There's lots of different sensitivities. There's lots of different psychic gifts. And the usefulness of learning astrology is we can see all these different types of sensitivities. The Neptune 12th house Pisces sensitivity is, again, inconceivable. I like to describe it as being from inside the walls and beneath the floorboards. It, again, feels like it's invisible. It's one with everything and invisible from everything at once. And Pisces does not evaluate topical details, but rather merges with the essence of the person, place, or thing. The 12th house soul, much like a sponge, absorbs the environment, merging as if a droplet of water making contact and merging with another. Now, this is some of the burden of the water element. Water feels what others can't see or know. The 12th house Pisces is where there's a cultivation of spiritual senses, having one foot in this world and one foot in another, in the realm of essence, the causal planes, that dreams into reality. So in other words, 12th house Pisces souls are learning how to cope with their sensitivities to make them useful, as well as how to dream into reality. Mars in the 12th house, for example, is learning how to act on their instinctual sensitivity, their instinctual creativity, their instinctual bleed through to the collective. Now, this sensitivity in a Neptune 12th house Pisces way is beyond control. It has to be learned or how to be held, as opposed to whether or not it exists. And this is why we deal with so much escapism in the 12th house Pisces, It's not merely because Pisces people want to be intoxicated all the time. It's because they're fundamentally sensitive, but not only sensitive, in a highly mysterious way. They may be dealing with enigmatic fears, enigmatic anxiety. Where is it located? Where does it come from? They don't know. So they go towards a coping mechanism of desensitization. This is why the addiction to drugs or alcohol. These are desensitizing agents. So that way, the highly sensitive soul can attempt to fit into a dumbed down, desensitized world. So we have to learn to embrace all our sensitivities. We don't have a choice whether or not we have it. Sensitive hearing can be a blessing or a curse. If we're born next to a construction site where all we hear all day long is the sound of motors and machinery, and we can't think straight, and we compare ourselves to all these other people walking past the construction site, and they're totally unfazed. Well, we may carry the conviction there's something wrong with us. But if we bring that sensitive hearing into a tropical rainforest where we hear the sounds of running water and birds and wind through the tree limbs as far as you can possibly see, well, then those sounds relaxes the body, the nervous system, inspires and uplifts the soul. And so any sensitivity is a blessing or a curse. We must learn to honor that sensitivity, so to use it in the most effective way. And to honor any sensitivity, we have to listen to it. We can't shove it down. We can't deny it. We can't make ourselves feel bad for being sensitive to a effed up world, for lack of a better word. And this is a common experience. The collective consciousness, which is what the 12th house Pisces soul is tuning into, which is Neptune itself, is impossible to describe, but the best word would be nightmare. A chaotic nightmare is the state of our collective consciousness. If you have a sensitivity that's merging to the collective, the whole of all life on planet Earth at this particular point in time, do you think you may be experiencing some natural depression? Do you think you may be experiencing some natural anxiety? Is it therefore our fault and we need to blame ourselves? And this can go both ways. I really feel it's an important point because people can get awfully moralistic when it comes to astrology. And this is where astrologers can really damage their clients. So we need to embrace the circumstantial reality in which we live. I'm not saying, hey, you have sensitivities, so don't get a prescription. We may need to have a prescription to effectively function in this day and age in which we are living. And what I'm saying is this is something to simply understand what and why, and to evaluate how it's useful for us. Because, of course, we could get a prescription on something that could fundamentally change our reality and we lose our soul, in which case it wouldn't be a useful medication. But what if we found a medication that allowed us to clear the distortion, such as having diagnosed bipolar or schizophrenia, in which case that medication allows us to return to ourselves and be clear. So we never want to get too swept off into the one size fits all when it comes to counseling in a highly individual way. Every single soul is completely unique, and we want to approach every soul and provide suggestions in entirely unique ways. All right. Now, when it comes to Pisces, 12th house, we deal with artists, musicians, great thinkers, and big-hearted humanitarians alike. And they all suffer a similar fate. Their sensitivity and bleeding through into the collective forces them to channel the deeper feelings, inspiration, and heartbreak into an essential expression as an offering back to the collective, back to itself. Again, think of the glyph of Pisces. Here's an artist, choicelessly sensitive, bleeding through to the collective, feeling depressed, feeling possessed by the overwhelm of how sad life is on planet Earth. And what can we do? We have to sing. We have to write. We have to create. This is, again, the Taurian field of Pisces. But my definition of an artist is someone who has no choice. An artist must be an artist to survive on this planet. Creating is their act of channeling their sensitivity to the collective through themselves as an offering back to the collective. This, in and of itself, is the remedy for many 12th house souls. There isn't going to be a pill that allows us to do that. But if we actually get into something really meaningful that gives us a deep sense of purpose and connection to something bigger than just ourselves, then we can take all of that suffering in our life and transmutate it into the medicine, the teaching, the art that can very much uplift and inspire others. This is ultimately why the 12th house in Pisces is associated with so much loss as well as compassion, because this earth is where we experience the full dichotomy of love and heartbreak, heaven and hell. We have senses that experience pleasure and pain. We all form attachments. We all experience heartbreak. That heartbreak is the opportunity of being alive on planet Earth. In a heaven realm, it's too comfortable and nothing gets done. You just float around. In a hell realm, it's too uncomfortable. You're just trying to cope with your basic coping. On Earth, where there's a full spectrum between heaven and hell, and we reverberate between the heaven that could be and the hell that is, what that does is awaken our soul to compassion. It strips away all of the illusions of what we thought was important or what we thought was our life about, but it just ends up being a distraction when we get into the full tragedy of life. That full tragedy of life actually awakens us to the greater depth, meaning, and purpose for being alive in and of itself. So the artistic act is a simultaneous possessing and releasing. The artist becomes possessed by the collective, by the musical composure, by whatever's sweeping through their body, and it gets channeled, released. Now, the 12th house is impossible to convey, so the artistic means is often the closest thing to expressing the 12th house ideal. And as I mentioned, the sensitivity of the 12th house can lead to this type of escapism. So we have to tether ourselves in some way, shape, or form. Having the sensitivity that merges with the surrounding environment, this is Pisces 12th house, deals with the phenomenon of boundarylessness. If you're someone with a high degree of boundarylessness and you go to a bar, you're going to merge like a sponge with the energy of the bar. Sexual desperation, loneliness, alcoholism, etc. So when we have this type of sensitivity, the 6th house polarity is healthy boundaries. We can lose ourselves, we become confused, we can't even think straight until we get our head above water. The experience of the 12th house is like a leaf blown around in the winds of the world. Someone who has Pluto in the 12th house, their south node in the 12th house, their south node in Pisces more than likely has this as a familiar experience coming from their past. Their early childhood home, the belief system changed this or that day. Mom brings in a new father with this or that reality, and it's like reality itself is a fog machine. In the south nodes in 12th house or in the sign of Pisces, this is a familiar condition to the soul, which is specifically learning the north node Virgo antidote of healthy boundaries. This is also about being healthy in our bodies, right? So while the south 6th house Virgo deals so much with health, and the 12th house can have so much to do with escapism, how I like to counsel people with addiction is to encourage people to actually focus in the Virgonian sense as much as possible. It's like if you take a hit of weed, you go off into a cloud. So what if you intentionally bring all of your energy and awareness into the process of smoking? This is actually how I encourage people to quit smoking who are addicted, because the process is not actually something that may be comfortable, enjoyable, or something we even like in our bodies. So if we can bring our awareness out of the sweeping whirlwind of Pisces and into the body and pay attention to the detail. How does your throat feel? How does your stomach feel? How does it feel moment by moment, minute by minute? Track the time, write it down. It can actually make overcoming an addiction quite easy and effortless. Because the way to overcome an addiction is to realize we don't really want to be doing it in the first place. And nobody really does. We're simply coping with a unmet need. So we have to get to that root. It can be difficult in the 12th house and or Pisces. This is a very subtle realm. Who knew that the neighbor in the adjacent room was having an energetic bleed through that was making us depressed? It could very well be the case for the highly Neptunian Pisces 12th house soul. Now, in the facing of that which we have no control, it is common to experience helplessness. When something does not go the way that we imagined, and Pisces rules imagination, which we'll talk about. When things don't go the way we want it to, we can become discouraged into giving up or living repeated unfortunate experiences, again, provoked to identify with negative experiences, to identify with being cursed, to be identified with being unlucky, because the 12th house is going through this stripping away, which is why we can also see souls in this archetype take a very spiritual or monastic direction. It may actually be a part of that soul's fate, you could say, to live that type of life. Some souls are fated to live spiritually, and if we try to escape, the soul's actually so advanced, it will prevent that escapism from happening by dissolving all that we try to cling onto. So the 12th can be so tragic or redundant in the experience of loss. It leads into a contemplation upon the deeper reality of the human condition, the nature of suffering. This is why the 12th is no doubt the house of the mystic. Now, resistance to the lessons around boundaries or what is real or what to trust can lead to increased repetitions of disillusionment or self-deception. Dreams, ideals, and beliefs are unraveled in the 12th house to their actual essence. But ultimately, there always exists the option for a soul to tune out reality. This is because we live in a creation where free will is law. So even if it's 100% a reality, we can still go delusional via free will and pretend, regardless of how contrastingly sharp the surrounding reality is. Similarly, there exists the option to be taken with a downward spiral or self-victimization, or one could simply be excessively focused upon the imperfection of the world in which we live to the point of living an existential nightmare. Such beliefs and orientations are ultimately disabling. This is again why we have to evaluate the belief itself. Our belief of what ultimate reality is can be deeply riveting, like music, as a necessary component of a Hollywood film, or it can be fundamentally disempowering to have a backdrop that creates discord between the individual and the world it is trying to comprehend and relate to. A few more points before we get to some chart examples. And I'm going to make sure we get to chart examples, so we'll move quickly. 12th house experience, being volunteered, sacrificed, left on the back burner, bled out through human sacrifice, made into the scapegoat. I think I'm repeating here, so we're going to skip. Washing dishes, had to stick that in there. It's just like, someone's going to wash dishes. I'll wash the dishes, says the 12th house soul. Now, 12th house has a particular way. Again, every single archetype, zodiac sign has like a specific geometry, essence, energy, direction. So 12th house, totally scattered. 12th house Pisces is chaos. So we have to learn the dichotomy of letting go and emptying and becoming inspired and fulfilled by this process of meandering. And in the 12th house, this process is inevitable. Resisting chaos is impossible. It is in many ways to be embraced. Lost in thought, story emerges. Lost in feeling, music emerges. Forgetting we are dancing, we become absorbed in the dance. So again, order and sequence is an afterthought in Pisces. In a sense, the process is to get lost and then return, get possessed and then return. So as opposed to prematurely or forcibly transcending this grand process, we should do well to build a container that can hold the creative and spiritual openness to meander in a similarly natural way. So artist studio has unfinished sculptures in one corner, unfinished paintings in the other corner, diary pages, musical notation strewn all over the floor, which goes hand in hand with the artist's genius. Because depending on what that artist feels in any given moment, in any given day, the artist can drift between the sculptures, the paintings, the diary pages. The artist is not even trying to bring any particular project to completion, which is what allows for these projects to complete themselves. This is about possession. This is about losing ourself. 12th house, it actually does itself. It goes automatically. It's about the lazy man's river into what is easy and effortless. Sometimes everything's got to dissolve or got to lose itself to find that flow that's actually true, that's actually natural. So identity is projected upon form after form. This is a 12th house common experience, seeking connection to its true essence, but rather projecting expectation. I'm going to be an artist. I'm going to be a poet. I'm going to be a singer. After shape-shifting from poet to artist to politician and being taken less and less seriously by the pragmatic world, the 12th house soul is learning how to creatively meander. So again, melting down, offering them to greater creative process of death and renewal. The soul is learning to take off pressure so to honor its own unique and God-given means of tapping inspiration. So that means we have to honor our own flow. What Pisces flow is going to look like is going to be different for every person. How every person tunes into the inspired state is going to be different for every person. That's why there's different spiritual paths. That's why there's different spiritual practices. Some people do japa, some people meditate, some people chant, but it all brings us to Neptune. These are all ways of transcending the mundane realm. Now, escape can be a natural response to the attunement and awareness feelings of futility, so overwhelm, pointlessness, helplessness. These are common experiences in the 12th that may drive us to shave our head and run off to the monastery just as much as it may drive us towards desensitizing agents. What's important to hear, again, is to honor the Pisces sensitivity, because others aren't always going to understand it. So people can say, hey, nothing's wrong, you're crazy, right? Which is gaslighting. We have to know what our sensitivities are. We need to Virgo, evaluate them, run experiments, test them, make sure that they're real and true, not have this type of murky, fake Cleo psychic. No, I think it's like this. No, when we develop our psychic senses, it's like, bam, getting smacked in the head. But the way that we can discern that intuition or that connection or that sensitivity is through testing it, running experiment. We want to use the scientific method. That's what we're all about as astrologers. We're both really into the spiritual, abstract, and scientific, what's testable and true. Okay. So the 12th house soul needs to watch out for being gaslit as well as being misled into a self-derogatory way of relating to oneself. Oh, I'm just the crazy one. Oh, I'm just the sensitive one. This is a Pisces, Virgo, 12th, 6th house phenomenon. It can lead to unconscious masochism. You know, this is a very common thing due to Christian religious conditioning, you know, where we have a history of self-flagellation and original sin. And so we should be, you know, poking at our impurities as a way of getting more pure. And this happens in Virgo Pisces polarity. Those who are familiar with Andy Kaufman, the famous comedian, he was one of the most self-derogatory comedians. He would beat himself up and do all of these things. He was a moon conjunct Saturn retrograde in Virgo. But there's always Pisces, Virgo signatures when we deal with that subconscious masochistic tendency. Okay, I'm skipping around. I want to talk briefly about enigmatic fears and superstitions. This can be common. It can be someone with Pluto or Saturn in the 12th, or Pluto or Saturn transits the 12th, you know, enigmatic superstitions. Why do we have these fears? As a child, don't step on a crack or you'll break your mother's back. There's this fear something is missing. There's some anxiety that cannot be located, surrounded by darkness, shadowy figures, Indeed, such unaccounted paranoia eventually drives the individual to find the source of its fears, which can become far more existential and related to the psyche, the unconscious, and its deeper relationship to the collective or essential reality, as opposed to a mundane problem that can be easily fixed with a new perspective or a new pill. And this is the all too common cure-all in the new age. Just put a new perspective on it. Oh, your hurricane just took away your house. Well, if you look at it like the universe might bring you something better 2 decades, just don't put the forced pill swallowing perspective onto people in any of your counseling, please. It just tends to damage people more than support them. We want to listen to people. That's how we help people in counseling. We want to get into their experience. That's what we do in counseling. So we want to understand what the 12th house experience is like. We want to relate to that consistent, being invisible, very common, redundant, unfortunate events, then not being taken seriously for them, being put on the back burner, being turned into the martyr. We want to have empathy, not approach somebody who in a very common 12th house way would have a bunch of people come up and gaslight them and say, no, that's not what's actually going on. We all love you. Now, in the 12th house, we can also actualize authentic compassion, which is the desire to give of oneself automatically and spontaneously without forethought or ulterior motivation. This is the mode of goodness in which real role models are situated and help lift us up by merging with them. It's again a merging function. True compassion is an outpouring from the heart that possesses the soul in and of itself, driving it into action. Pisces never stops. It's never completed. No stopping or standing, always moving. So too, compassion is an active principle that responds to recognition of God's spirit truth in one another. As reflections of that, we are and share in something divine. The highest transcendental act of the 12th is to become possessed by the will of God and to the point where everything flows easily and effortlessly. This is the realm of mystery and miracles. The transcendence of the 12th house is the completion of the entire cycle of life itself, the orientation of which is no longer merely adaptive to its environment or concerned with survival or even attempting to spread what it has taken and learned throughout the world. That is not fated in the greater orchestration. It has come to be through surrendering. Okay. So 12th house is no different than any other house where we really do need to get in it to understand it. So if you have no planets in the 12th, pay attention to when you have 12th house transits. That's your opportunity to get inside of the 12th house experience and develop more empathy for highly 12th house souls. Okay. The inner landscape of the mystic is no different than the heart-bleeding artist or insane asylum occupant, both intoxicated by otherworldly bliss, but also seemingly torn at the very core of their being. Though invisible to everyone else, what is seemingly like a hurricane of inexplicable events occurs around the 12th house individual. So that's what we want to have empathy for. Not, you must be responsible for this inexplicable events. How else could it happen? It doesn't happen to other people. We want to have empathy for the inexplicable phenomenon of the 12th. Okay. This is again ultimately to provoke surrendering. And the 6th house Virgo polarity is naturally very humbling. In a way, their very lives are an offering and sacrifice. Like a Buddhist sand mandala or a rose complete with flower and thorn, presenting the whole of beauty and tragedy. The inspirations they receive could similarly be ripe with unseen hidden blessings that have an acquired taste. The 12th house, real spirituality. We all like to say, I'm spiritual, I'm loving. Real spirituality, the spirituality that Jeffrey Wolf Green teaches about, is an acquired taste. Ultimately, nothing escapes inevitability, that all forms will dissolve, and the consciousness which created all things will return to itself. This is why we get these hidden blessings that have been talked about in all religions. From the Bible, Matthew 5:3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. From the Quran, Surah 93:8, and he found you poor and made you self-sufficient. Luke 6:4, blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. And from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna says, when one becomes attached to me, referring to himself as God, I gradually decrease his wealth and possessions, that I make his relatives, friends, and well-wishers indifferent towards him. In this way, after taking away everything that was dear to him, I bestow upon him my association and my devotees, which is rarely obtained even by the demigods. Like the seventh, the 12th house soul is learning and evolving through the mirror of the other. Only in this case, the other is the entirety of the whole. The collective bleeds through into the individual, the consciousness such as celestial objects, the consciousness such as a culture, such as a place, a nation, a color, a tree, an element of nature, the consciousness of a school of fish, a mountain. Each has its own distinct energy. 12th house Pisces Neptune phenomenon, we can directly connect to that energy through merging. Everything's got a fingerprint. It is through the Neptune Pisces 12th house function we can therefore connect to anything. Your favorite role model left their body centuries ago. Does that mean that they can't inspire you just the same as if they were in physical form before you now? Of course they can. In fact, the reality of that soul who has already left their body being present and able to inspire you in ways that seems impossible is much more real than we may have been led to believe. So the 12th house soul is learning through artistic expression, singing dreams, and is receptive to whatever is around them. Again, the Taurian. This is the trumpeting of angels. God divides itself into the zodiac. God divides its life into individuality. Then those individual forms become conscious and aware of the God and wants to return. This is love. This is the all in all. That's inevitability. So the soul is learning to relate to the whole, spiritually, symbolically, and also learning about the power of imagination. This will be our last point before we get to examples. Dreaming is an in-between realm where the subconscious and unconscious conspires with creative forces to present new ideas, images, or objects, an internalized world in which we are like our own gods or goddesses, allows us to experience environments unavailable to the common physical senses. Dreams and imaginary thought are beyond our control, though they can be guided and are often where we discover unpredictable mystical content. Some dreams are more or less useful than others. Neptune. Some deliver deeply meaningful messages where others relay intense confusion. So how to get the best use from imagination or dreaming? Like water, it needs some container. But the more flexible we are holding that container's boundaries, the more chaos we can catch or let in, so to speak. So, for example, if we're introducing the zodiac to a group of people and we say, hey, you've never heard of the zodiac before, meditate on Sagittarius. That would be different than giving somebody or a group of people the glyph of Sagittarius and say, meditate on this sigil. You see, that creates more of a boundary, more of a focal point, more of an essence, and yet the whole of everyone's imagination can spin while having that essential focus point upon a sigil. Without any bounds at all, there is no experience. So the 12th house experience is always an exploration of boundarylessness, which means that there are boundaries and they can be transgressed. How, when, why? This is what we're learning. This is what's key. The 12th house Pisces function allows for scrapping as much as spontaneous creative possession or redirection. It requires a balance between the need for dissolving and letting go while holding on to an essence simultaneously. That's what we're all again learning with Saturn in Pisces. We want to form something, and it's almost like the more we try to force it, the more it falls apart. If we try to force open the springtime flowers before springtime, the more of a tendency there is for those flowers to dissolve between our fingers. Pisces is about honoring a process. Pisces is an easy, effortless, natural flow and unfolding. Even if the essence isn't clearly defined, we can hold an essence, like God, for example. What is this practice called japa? Ram, 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 Ram. What is that? It's a Virgo Pisces phenomenon where Virgo on beads, again and again and again and again, repeat, 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 name, 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 name. And the name of God is an essence which is inconceivable. We don't know what God is, but we're tuning into it increasingly by chanting the name Ram. With a deeply entranced soul, you almost have to catch the bits that come off of them, because the artist, much like the guru, is just going to keep Ram, 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 Ram. They're just possessed. They're just in it. And the real advanced souls, that's what they're in all the time. You have to catch it from them, because they're not going to sit down and explain what is just effortlessly running through them. The canvas or musical instrument simply catches what the musician channels, like how a disciple instructed with the duty to write the wisdom of their guru is at once like an instrument. And just like the musician, they merge into one through the divine act of music production. The guru and disciple are one in the divine act of Leela. The lover of life is absorbed in living and gives to life fully. The others, living creatures, and the whole macroorganism of the earth itself. We are now going to move into some chart examples, but before we do, let's review the EA formula for chart interpretation, which is beginning with the house position of Pluto, wherever that is. The soul's been doing that for many, many lifetimes. So you got Pluto in the 12th house. Guess what? You're automatically a very 12th house soul. You got the moon's south node in the 12th house, or in the sign of Pisces. I would say that you are a Pisces soul. Now, these are signatures that means you've had that in the past and you're bringing a deeply Pisces nature into this life. Therefore, you are more than likely learning the Virgo antidote, healthy boundaries, separation, left brain discerning, etc. Okay? So this is the formula for understanding the past. And we can also understand the formula of where the soul wants to go throughout this life. Say if the moon's north node is in the 12th house, or if the moon's north node is in Pisces, or if Pluto is in the 6th house, that will similarly strike the chord of the Pisces archetype. Pisces will be absolutely relevant to that soul throughout their life. They are learning that archetype. They are learning to get into it. They're learning to let go. They're learning to surrender to the greater plan. They're learning to make it easier. They're learning to be more open and less intolerant by moving into Pisces. Whereas people who have an exceptional amount of Pisces they're bringing into this life may actually need to learn to become more intolerant, as funny as that is to say to a group full of spiritual people. Okay? So this is, once again, our cosmic antidote to the 12th house dilemma. I'm just going to give some really quick chart examples, and I mean real quick, but I'm also going to annotate so we can see what's going on. So in the case of MLK, we see that his north node ruler is Venus in Pisces. Okay, so he has these two planets in Pisces. The reason I brought his chart up first, though, is it's really interesting to take a look at his assassination date. This is when the transiting north node was conjunct Saturn in MLK's 12th house. And that's Neptune was also transiting his natal south node. Okay, I'm not going to be explaining all of these things, but we're going to be pointing out the signatures as to why these souls are very connected to the 12th house Pisces archetype. Look at Mr. Nelson Mandela with his north node in the 12th. Now, Mr. Mandela spent 27 years in jail, basically entirely an act of selfless sacrifice, doing his Pluto polarity point to be a justice warrior, which certainly led him into separation and individuation. But this was a big part of his overall life path, to be surrendering and to be sacrificed to the collective, because this soul sacrifice had a huge impact and totally revolutionized his entire area. This is one of my favorite authors, totally revolutionary Russian author. And we see his moon south node, the planetary ruler, is in the 12th house. But the quote of his is something like, I believe all men of great heart and intelligence must suffer greatly on this planet. And we see that coming directly from his past experiences. We also see the signature that would be connected to him being an author and the power of his writing. Virginia Woolf, another famous author, and her writing really is an excellent description of the 12th house reality, especially the fact that we see this loaded Taurus stellium in the 12th, because she has these beautiful 12th house Pisces types of metaphors that are also extremely somatic. You know, the smells and the winds and the colors and all of that is key to Virginia Woolf's writing. She had a very tragic life. She was very depressed throughout her life, and she did commit suicide by drowning herself, filling her pockets with stones, drowning in the local river. Again, we see transiting Saturn in her 12th house. We see the transiting north node was conjunct Neptune at the time of her taking her life. So let's go deeper with Spalding Gray. He was an actor, a comedian, and a writer who would write autobiographically. And he spoke very much of his early relationship to a guru whom he had a very harsh, disillusioning experience with. And he actually wrote about his experiences with this guru, how he lost himself, how he lost his mind, became a servant to that person, and then wandered for so many years, confused when he found out that this guru had, you know, a shadow side, which is a very common disillusioning experience for people with dealing with Pisces or 12th house dynamics. Having his south node ruler conjunct the north node, this further suggests that this could be a guru that he had a past life relationship with, and that there would be a need for him to review his ideals and his relationship to this guru figure. So another example of 12th house phenomena is we don't see the moon's nodes or Pluto necessarily aspecting Milton Erickson's chart. We do see this loaded Capricorn stellium in the 12th house. Milton Erickson came down with polio and was unable to move for years. This was reflected in this Chiron, Mars, Saturn in Capricorn signature in the 12th house. It was actually born out of these years of not being able to move. He became the father of modern psycho or hypnotherapy. While he was able to move, he became a master of his north node in Scorpio by tuning into the unconscious. While he was laying in bed, he would notice the bodily movements, and he was very tuned into the physical bodily movements. We see the south nodal ruler, Venus in Aquarius, is very objective. So he's a very observant person. While he is catatonic with polio, he notices people's tone of voice, body posture, and all of these things speak to the unconscious, which is how he's able to pioneer hypnotherapy so effectively. And he was also able to heal his crippling relationship with polio through mastering the imagination. And the imagination is a huge part of hypnotherapy, obviously. It's about using the imagination to generate useful results. He discovered this through essentially reflecting upon his muscle memories. When he previously in life was running or swinging, he would put all of his concentration on the feeling of what that felt like in his body while he was catatonic with polio. And that's how he learned how to retrain his entire body to move muscle by muscle. Okay, so it's another 12th house phenomenon because we see the whole Capricorn challenge, the whole, surrendering, letting go. And then what comes out of this is a really powerful medicine that's offered back to the collective. We'll skip Van Gogh, but we can see that he's there. He had an interesting suicide during a nodal return. Salvador Dali, I just have to bring in because he's got South Node Pisces and Pluto in the 12th house. So I spoke to highly Pisces souls who have, evolved for many lifetimes. This would be a soul with South Node, the ninth house Pisces, who has a very deep connection to the conceptual in this dreamy, intuitive, right brain way. And that's how he created his art. He developed a specific technique, which is what a North Node Virgo person would do. See, a South Node Pisces is already coming in. He's already a visionary. He's already a painter. He actually dropped out of art school because he thought he was already a suitable artist, didn't need to go to art school. But he does develop a technique which involves dreaming, and his dreaming, as well as reflecting on the subconscious, is the technique through which Salvador Dali painted. All right, I'm going to skip him too. You probably didn't know how Pisces Ozzy Osbourne was, but that's why I wanted to point him out as an example. This was someone who was extremely abused, had a very, very hard childhood, and attempted to take his life multiple times in the past. Okay, Heath Ledger, another very, very Pisces soul. We're going to skip him as well, but we had another interesting suicide as well with John Williams. I don't want to get too much into breaking apart all of these charts. I actually just wanted to take a glance so that way we can see these very pronounced historic examples as they are reflected into their birth charts. All right, and I believe that leaves just several minutes for Q&A.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, thanks. Just coming back to the question about no planets in the 12th house that was asked earlier on. How far would you go to see, for example, Neptune in the first house as effectively also being Mars in Pisces? I know you, because Timothy mentioned, Timothy, you mentioned transits and things like this, but how far would you go also to look to see the house and the sign that Neptune is in as placing the two ruling planets into Pisces?
It's a good question.
How far would you go?
Because, I want to use this as an example here to explain the difference between houses and signs. Because in evolutionary astrology, we understand archetypal similarity. There's an archetypal similarity between the 12th house Pisces and its planetary ruler, right, Neptune. And they aren't exactly the same. Certainly, the planet is a specific psycho-spiritual function. So Mars is a specific function that's completely different than Neptune. So they are in no way, shape, or form the same thing. What I want to speak to about houses is that houses specifically reflect the individual. Everyone is going to have a very unique 12th house dependent on what sign is on the 12th house cusp. You may be born during a time, say people born 2 decades from now, there's going to be many Pluto Pisces born. But when someone's born with Pluto in the 12th house, that means that they have had lifetimes of 12th house experience. So the houses in a certain way really reflect the individual soul, but they also archetypally reflect the same nature. The 12th house reflects the archetype of Pisces. Does that answer your question?
It's difficult to know where to draw the line. That's just because it's not just it's with anyone where you'll
need to start with the planet. So Mars is the function of desire, instincts, how we're acting on instincts, whereas Neptune is how we're tuning into God through this dissolving function. So they have completely different functions.
Thank you. Thanks, Timothy. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Harry.
all digestible? Pretty straightforward. Everyone's mastered transcendence. We got some hands
Go for it,
raised.
Tressa. I think I got you unmuted. And then we'll do Jody, and then we'll do July.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for like grasping the ungraspable. So I have a stellium in the 12th house, Pluto South Node in Virgo in the 12th, along with Jupiter and Uranus conjunct. So North Node in Pisces, and my ruler Mercury is on my midheaven in Cancer. So just the power of your presentation in terms of like explanation was like the whole time I'm just like, oh my god, like so fantastically beautiful. And I have gone both to the disillusionment and addiction, and then kind of came out of it, and that's been my life's work of helping people in recovery. So you know,
Perfect.
yeah, in terms of the expression of the energies of like the whole spectrum, like I've
Well,
lived
sounds like
it.
a
And
signature of bringing it out into the world. So good for you for
yeah,
making it a part of your career.
thank you so much.
Okay, Jody.
Yeah. So thank you, Timothy. There was a lot of information. I don't have it synthesized, but and I don't have a lot in the 12th house, but I hear bits and pieces, and I think I can re-listen to this and relate the Pisces and or Neptune pieces that you talk about for highly, whatever, for somebody who's super focused in the 12th house to parts of my chart that relate to that. Yes? Yeah.
Great. Was there a question there I missed?
So, okay, sorry. The question that I wanted to ask was, like, we move through our different lifetimes in different orders, and it's not like we get to the 12th house chart last,
Correct.
right? So it's like I'm learning what I'm learning now, and maybe I was there, or maybe I'm going to be there 20 lifetimes from now.
Right. And there's no order like this. You know, we can see souls of an incredibly high spiritual evolution. They don't necessarily have to have Pisces or 12th house signatures. The zodiac does reflect the overall dance of all of life itself. But when we bring that down to the human dimension and are looking at birth charts, it's much more complex than that. We read the soul's stage of evolution, which is not necessarily reflected in the chart itself.
Thank you.
You betcha. Was there one more?
July, and then we have a
We're
question
about
from
to wrap
Tom
up.
I can read for you.
Sweet.
I'll make it quick.
We have
So
time.
thank you. Okay, good. Well, thank you for the presentation. It's well, also, first of all, just recognizing, you know, you've been through a lot with the hurricane, so props to you for, you know, being here and presenting the information during a very intense time. So
I'm a
this-
12th house soul, so I'm quite used to it. And I do have Jupiter transiting over my 12th house planets, as well as Neptune retrograde squaring my sun to the exact minute today. So thank you. Appreciate the recognition.
Oh, definitely. So it's interesting hearing all of this, because when I was first learning about astrology, I felt such a connection to this Pisces Virgo axis, and I didn't really understand why. But then in the whole sign system, this is my nodal axis, but in Porphyry, it's a little shifted. So I guess my question is maybe relating to the different. I know this is evolutionary astrology, but and the North Node and South Node do relate to, you know, past life. And I also feel that, okay, you know, let me condense this. So I feel, and in a way know, that in my most recent past life, in terms of linear time, this was my axis, this Pisces and Virgo, because I still feel that within me, but now it's shifted. So do you have any understanding of that kind of experience of like, of very much relating to this kind of axis, but then it's actually not your nodal axis? Or is this just part of the human experience? This question, the questioning of the 12th and 6th house and that polarity.
If you highly relate, then it will show up in your chart. There's no discrepancy between us, our soul lifetime, and the birth chart. And in regards to house systems, I do not recommend the whole sign house system for evolutionary astrology. So you will be able to learn the evolutionary astrology system to its depth and be able to understand and answer your own question. Make sense?
Thank you.
You bet.
We have a question from Don and then Kristen. So Don wrote, could you speak to why death is an 8th house theme rather than the 12th?
8th house is transmutation. So 8th house is where form melts down and changes. 12th house is total transcendence. It's not just about the changing of form, life after life, because 8th house reality is like we have all these lifetimes that are kind of like spiraling and learning through this winding. The 12th house transcendence is to return to the source of all that is. It's to return to the alpha and the omega. So 8th house also reflects the soul, Pluto, where Neptune, 12th house, Pisces reality reflects God. So there's a relationship, and this is the water trinity in the zodiac, where we have moon, ego, Pluto, soul, Neptune, God. And essentially our life is a co-conspiracy between these three. We're identifying from the ego. Our soul is also generating experience via evolutionary necessity, co-conspiring with Neptune, God, the all that is, the all in all. Great question.
Hi, Timothy. Kristen.
You're pretty low, Kristen. Can you make yourself louder? Or just get closer?
Hey, Kristen.
Hi. Here we go. I don't have my microphone on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to thank you so much for being a part of this weekend. It's a wonderful lecture. You covered so much ground on a topic that is immense. So thank you for that. And one thing I just wanted to comment on that I felt was really valuable, for people that are doing this work with clients, is that if you don't have a lot of planets in the 12th house or in Pisces, like you mentioned, I just wanted to restate again the value in looking at the transits, as you mentioned, or progressed moon through the 12th, which that's what I have right now. I feel like, it just becomes like having a Pisces moon for a couple of years. And so thank you for bringing that up. And the gentleman that was speaking about Neptune in the first, I think would be really helpful for him to look back in his life and see when the transits were moving through that 12th house. So I wanted to thank you for that. In particular, Saturn through that 12th house. And you had some of the excellent examples of people taking their life and suicide under that transit. I think it was in particular. And I loved the Milton Erickson example you gave as well. So that was fascinating. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, we got Valerie Bernard.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Great. I've been confused. I have several planets in the 12th house. And I'm confused about what it means to, like, are they hidden? Do you have less access to them? So I have the South Node, Venus, and Moon in the 12th house. And I do just struggle with connecting with those archetypes. They feel super strong and yet hard to access. And I wonder if you can talk about what it means to how to access or experience planets when they're sort of like almost hidden or lost in the 12th house, if I'm thinking about it wrong when I think about it that way.
Well, it's interesting because when we have planets conjunct the South Node, as you described, it tends to bring up that type of complex dynamic. Whenever there's planets conjoining the Moon's South Node, it can mean one of three things. These can be past life dynamics that are being brought into the current life that need to be resolved. There can be gifts that have been very developed by the soul in prior lifetimes that are being brought into the current lifetime. But what is almost always the case is a mixture of both. There is a highly attuned sensitivity and gifts to those planets conjoining the South Node, and there are issues to be resolved. So really easy, stereotypical moon on the South Node. This could involve the relationship to one's mother or being a mother and identifying with the mother, or how we identify. That could be a relevant theme through one's life, just as a quick, silly example. Does that make sense? I'm glad we had more time here. I got the time wrong. I thought we were going 90 minutes, so we still got another 20, which is fantastic.
Stephanie asks, description of the moon's north node transit through the 12th house. Themes, year-long transit. Blessings, Tim. Always inspiring.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the transit where we're going to learn the 12th house the most, because wherever the transiting moon's north node is, that's where the soul is actively learning through having experience. So that's actually one of the most important transits to be tracking in any person's chart. So when the north node transits the 12th, we each get a taste of 12th house reality. Why? Because the soul is wanting to evolve, learn, and grow through getting into the 12th house by having 12th house experience. So it's quite common for the north node to go into the 12th house after its transit of the first house. Sometimes that can include some individuating or separating. Not always, but that's a part of the first house Aries archetype, which could then be followed by the north node's transit of the 12th house, where there's this uncertainty, there's this meandering. I just cut from them or this thing, and now what is my purpose in life? Or the thing that we aimed for and had all planned falls apart, and suddenly we find ourselves at the whim of fate. This is a common experience to happen when the north node is in the 12th house. And there's opportunities to be getting deeper into creativity, spirituality, charitable offerings, and to explore and understand the relationship that we have to the collective. And there's opportunities for us to offer something back, or to open up a new way of sharing from a more creative or metaphorical place, for example.
I see some questions around the correct house system. I just want to clarify, Timothy never said that you have to use porphyry, and Jeffrey Wolf Green never taught that himself. I think using whole sign is just a very strong departure from, well, I know EA astrologers that use other house systems, but not necessarily whole sign. So I just want to clarify that.
And that is why I said I generally discourage the whole sign house system for evolutionary astrology. Jeffrey Green said, find the house system that resonates for you the most. My personal takeaway is I see people get really confused when they start mixing whole signs with EA. We want to be able to interpret the chart through the system of evolutionary astrology and make sense of it by knowing the whole means of technique of interpretation before we start changing around the fundamental things, as a general recommendation. And this is a exploration in itself too. So maybe this is a good segue. I think something that can be confusing for people coming into EA is understanding how we're merging archetypes. So when it comes to houses and signs, it's almost like we're merging these archetypes together, like mixing two primary paints. And there's particular archetypes that when you merge them together, there's particular experiences that are much more likely. So for example, both the 10th house and the 12th house has to do with our public facing self, or our offering back to the whole. Again, the 12th is this Piscean offering back to the collective, Whereas the 10th house is this going out into the world, recognizing our skills, capabilities, and proving what we can do in the world. So if we see Capricorn and 12th house come together, we can see those types of archetypes. If we see Saturn in the 12th house, we can see those types of archetypes. Now, what about if we put Pluto, or I'm sorry, what if we put Scorpio on the 12th house cusp? And we've got planets in Scorpio in the 12th house. We're merging Scorpio and Pisces together. Well, this would all the more likely bring the phenomenon of being a scapegoat or being projected upon, where the person can experience this absorption, 12th house, of all of this bullshit, Scorpio, of all of this unconscious projection. Furthermore, the soul is going to have access, Scorpio in the 12th house, to a thoroughly hidden reality. A reality probably much deeper, more realer, and potentially more scary than what a lot of people can see. So that's again merging the archetypes of Scorpio and the 12th house together. If we put Taurus in the 12th house, this may be a creative artistic signature. Again, spiritual senses, being able to channel directly into form, or to be able to create from a very spiritual place, to be able to create temple where there's a container, Taurus, for 12th house phenomenon. Or we can bring Gemini into the 12th house, in which case the person isn't just Gemini talking about whatever is interesting and factoids and just studying whatever's on the internet in the 12th house type of way. This may be somebody who is deeply into researching, understanding, wants to know and break apart all the bits and pieces of ultimate reality, 12th house. So that's how we put these archetypes together. You may have no planets in the 12th, you may have no planets in Pisces, but you can look at the zodiac sign, which is on your 12th house cusp, and that's going to be unique to you. That's going to reflect your own 12th house sensitivity and signature. So with no 12th house signature, you still can identify what is the planetary ruler of your 12th house, and then reflect on it, right? That's what we're learning to do, is we're learning to put all these things together ourselves. It becomes really simple once we get the basics with astrology. So it's like, oh yeah, I've got this archetype on the 12th house cusp, and I guess I have noticed a merging of these two archetypes coming together. I've got Cancer in the 12th house, and I'm literally a mother to everybody. And everybody comes to me for my love and my big heart of compassion, because it's almost like everybody feels my warmth in the collective. That's Cancer in the 12th house. What about Leo in the 12th house? You know what experiences a hell of a lot of stigma and projection? It is the sign of Leo. Oh, Leo, those narcissists. Oh, they're so selfish, blah, blah, blah. Well, what if it's Leo in the 12th house? Or what if all the stellium of planets in Leo is ruled by a 12th house sun? That would completely change the flavor of that Leo stellium. So what we're talking about now is the technique known as planetary rulerships. But this is also how we understand how the different parts of the chart merge together. If you put Leo in the 12th house, you're not going to get a narcissist who is arrogantly putting themselves first. You're going to get a savior complex, who in a 12th house way is continuously spreading themselves out thin, trying to save the world, trying to be the knight in shining armor, trying to also express themselves and be seen by the collective. But Leo in the 12th house is thoroughly different than Leo in the first. So everybody has a 12th house nature. And by looking at the pairing between the house and the zodiac sign, that's one of the most important keys to seeing the total uniqueness of the soul itself. That is why I spoke to the importance of houses. That's why you have to know the exact moment of your time of birth. Those houses and the cusps of those houses and how each planet rules a different house is going to be highly unique per each and every individual, even those that you were born the same day of. They're all going to have all the same planets in the same signs. They're all going to be in different houses. There's going to be different house cusp rulers.
Let's see, we got one from Jody. Go for it, Jody.
Hey, Jody.
Okay, I don't know if you can. Hello, sorry, I'm like in Thailand, like I've been staying up all night. So, but basically, I think you answered the question. I was thinking like I was gonna ask about progressions, but I think that's just basically what one needs to pay attention. Is it the same? Because like basically my Sagittarius rising moved into the 12th house and all there's a bunch of planets there all of a sudden. Except my lonely Venus has moved into Capricorn rising kind of thing. So there's all these, so, but I think I just need to pay attention to the Sagittarian themes in the 12th house. Is it different, like for the rising sign and the progressed, when your progression moves into the 12th house? Basically, I'm asking about progressions.
Yeah, so it's similar to transits. Both transits and progressions are a time tracking technique. So similarly to transits, you can track progressions when they transit your 12th house or when progress planets transit Pisces. Yeah. So it's getting into more specific time tracking techniques, but it works much the same way. Everybody has a time we will experience the Pisces archetype because Pisces represents the ending of any cycle. So this is universal. And Pisces represents inevitability. Pisces represents the alpha and the omega. In reality, we never actually leave Pisces. It's where we've always been. It's where we are. It's what we're never actually separate from. And inconceivably, simultaneously, we are always separate from it. That's actual Pisces reality. It gets more and more inconceivable and impossible to talk about who is God and our relationship to God through this simultaneous, inconceivable union and separation. A lot of people, well, I shouldn't generalize, but it's quite common for people to say, Pisces 12th house, when everything returns to oneness. And I actually have a small discrepancy here. I say this is where everything returns to the inconceivable original reality, which is one and simultaneous difference from. This is actually a much more esoteric and occult truth because it contains more of an acquired taste, I will say once again. The simultaneous oneness and difference from all that is what I would say is the actual Pisces 12th house reality, which is why the phenomenon of boundarylessness is simultaneously an exploration of boundaries. So again, this is an acquired taste to understand the simultaneous oneness and difference from all that is. We are returning to that. I'm going off on a bit of a personal tangent here. We're returning to that, but what that is inconceivable. So to call it oneness is actually to start to assign more of a concept than the mystery it actually is. To be one and different from is quite mysterious. It is also what is fundamentally required for love to exist. How can we love anything that we are one with and therefore no different than ourselves? We have to have difference and separation for love to exist. So Pisces reality is where the all in all merges back to itself. The final reality is mysterious in essence.